Mazel Tov. Much to celebrate this Shabbat, a bat mitzvah with a beautiful voice for Torah, and a special anniversary, and Shabbat itself, being together in community and congregation. And the beginning of summer. We've earned this summer, I think. And so I had planned to speak about summer and the glories of summer. But to be honest, I couldn't sleep last night. And you might ask, what is it that keeps you up at night? You know that question, that litmus test? What are those worries? What keeps you up at night? Well, for me last night, it was the news coming from my home of origin, the country to the south. In our Torah portion, there is a little section that seems to stand alone. There it is written, Ken ya'aseh chukat achat yihiyah lachem v'lager u'le'ezrach ha'aretz. There shall be one law for you, for the stranger and for the citizen of the country. There shall be one set of laws. The ger in ancient Israel was the resident alien, and she or he had to keep the laws of the land as if he or she were a citizen, and that person was also, the ger was protected under the laws of the land. There is evil south of the Canadian border. There's no other way to describe it. It is planned that tomorrow, thousands of undocumented migrants will be rounded up from their homes, and families will be separated, and some will be deported, and some will be put into camps. We can't pretend we don't know it anymore. This week, even the popular magazine Rolling Stone ran an article entitled, "What It Looks Like to Care for Separated Migrant Children." It's written there, there's a lot that remains unknown about family separations along the United States southwestern border that began in secret in 2017, nearly a year before the federal government acknowledged them publicly. That's in part because the federal employees and contractors involved were prohibited from speaking with reporters. But it's easy to imagine the scenes, even if we aren't eyewitnesses to the scenes. There are stories being told where citizens notice that suddenly their neighbors' apartments are empty. Citizens notice that their colleagues suddenly don't show up for work even after having never missed a day in the 7 years they've known one another. Citizen children notice that their friends suddenly don't come to school. Where are they now? And what will become of them? Despite the fact that journalists are not allowed inside, there are verified reports that are growing now of children who are dying in these detention camps, detention centers, I'll call them. This week we read that children are denied soap and sunlight. They are given inedible or frozen food. They are made to sleep on concrete floors with only an aluminum blanket to comfort them in some of these detention centers. And some of these centers of evil are privately owned and operated, and money is being made for profit on the backs of these children. So this is what haunts me. This is what keeps me up at night. There is also a debate that has been brewing in the Jewish press and in Jewish circles, and I think it's reached a height this week. And that is asking, can we ever say any other evil is like the evil that was experienced during the Holocaust. And some zero in on the question of the definition of a concentration camp. And some zero in on the question of what are crimes against humanity. And some ask, what are the signs of a tyrant? And some ask, how do we know when it's state-sponsored terror? And some ask, what is the meaning of never again? Does it apply only to Jews or to other peoples as well? And while at the beginning I thought these conversations were interesting and somewhat valuable, I find myself very frustrated by them this week. I believe these debates are a terrible distraction, a futile exercise in comparative suffering. And I understand that if every evil is likened to the Holocaust, then the Holocaust loses its unique place in history, and it is unique in history. It stands alone in history. But that does not mean that there are no other genocides of other peoples in the world. And that does not mean that there are not reparations owed to other peoples of the world. And that does not mean that there are no warning signs or lessons learned from then that can be applied to atrocities now. Holocaust historian and protector of Holocaust history, Professor Deborah Lipstadt, says about these detention camps and about the separation of families on the southern border of the United States, she says, this is not the Holocaust, but it is evil. There is evil at that border. And everything in our Torah and everything in our history and everything in our conscience tells us that we must not stand idly by. I believe, I hope, I pray that in the coming days we're going to see that there is no longer tolerance. I believe we're going to see people taking to the streets and making their voices heard, making demands of the American government, responding to these evil practices. And I don't know if or how the Canadian government might be an influence, but I do know that there is a lot that we as Canadians and as Jews can do. We can give tzedakah to support the lawyers who are supporting the families torn apart. We can give tzedakah to worthy causes like the Religious Action Center, which is the advocacy and activist wing, the lobbying wing of the Reform movement in Washington, D.C. We can support Jewish organizations, justice-seeking organizations like Bend the Ark and Tru'ah. In this brief little section, just 2 verses that I alluded to earlier from this week's parsha, it also explains how Pesach is unique on our calendar. It's the only festival where the stranger who lives among us is called upon to feast together with us. When a stranger who resides with you would make a Pesach offering to Adonai, it must be offered in accordance with the rules and the rites of the Pesach sacrifice. That is to say, this ger, this stranger among us, the migrant, the asylum seeker, the refugee, they are invited to come and feast at our Pesach table. They are invited to come and taste the taste of freedom. They are invited to hear the narrative, how we came to know freedom. This past week we heard from Marnie Feinberg, the daughter-in-law of the late Joyce Feinberg. Joyce, you might know, was raised here at Holy Blossom, educated, married here at Holy Blossom, and then became an active member of the Tree of Life congregation in Pittsburgh. And tragically, she was among the 11 Jews who were murdered there earlier this year. And Marnie said, in response to that terror, in response to that hate, in response to that anti-Semitism, she developed a program called Seder to Seder. Perhaps some of you participated. Seder to Seder is an idea, simple idea, that we should bring strangers, non-Jews who have never been to a Seder before, to join us at our Seder table. Invite 2 guests who might have their eyes opened by what they see there, who might have their moral compass expanded and better anchored by hearing of the Exodus from Egypt. And a few weeks ago, we hosted right here at Holy Blossom Temple an iftar dinner during Ramadan, where we joined together with Muslim neighbors in their feast. What happens when we feast together, strangers? We reinforce our commitment to freedom for all. We break down the barriers between strangers and we become neighbors. We see ourselves to be the neighbors that we are. We admit that freedom is fragile and we promise to guard and protect it for one another. Because we know that when freedom is threatened for some, it won't be long before freedom is threatened for others. Now, there is no mitzvah. Out of all 613 mitzvot, there is not one that demands us to love our spouse, to love our own parents, even to love our own children. But there are mitzvot to love God. And there are mitzvot, one glorious mitzvah at the center of Torah, at the heart of Torah, ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, to love your neighbor as yourself. And 36 times, the most often repeated mitzvah in all of Torah, is the mitzvah to love the stranger. And sometimes we're given the rationale for why we are to love the stranger, for you know the heart of a stranger. You know the feelings of a stranger, for you were once strangers too in the land of Egypt. Why the repetition 36 times? My goodness. Probably, first of all, because it's hard to do. And human nature is to turn the other way. Not my problem, not my responsibility. And so God commands, Torah demands 36 times with this reinforcement, you shall love the stranger. You shall love the stranger. Why else 36 times? 36, you know, of course, is double chai. 18 times 2. Life. 2 lives are wrapped up in this mitzvah. Number 1, the life of the receiver, the life of the stranger, that life that may depend on our mitzvah. And second, our own lives. For our character is judged by the life of one who fulfills this mitzvah or does not fulfill this mitzvah. So I will take one excerpt from the sermon I intended about summertime. It comes from the Baal Shem Tov, who loved to look at the nature surrounding him and be uplifted by it, the nature that I hope we'll be enjoying over the weeks and months ahead of us. I hope it passes by slowly. The Baal Shem Tov teaches, look up to the heaven and count the stars. A human being may see God's sublimity most when he looks up and sees the course of the stars and the wondrous lights they give. That is how one fills himself with the wonder of God. But how much greater is it in the wonder that a human being might find when she considers herself, when she considers himself, looks within, and comes to realize the wonder of the divine spirit that was placed within. Yes, let us wonder at the vastness of what is outdoors, the oceans, the lakes, the mountains, the stars, the blue sky that we've been longing for. And yes, let us look within and be awed by the divinity we see inside. Let us recognize the divinity in every human being, in the one who suffers, in the one who is the stranger in our midst, in the one who suffers across the border. And let us be reminded again and again of the divinity that we shine forth when we respond to the suffering of another, when we lift ourselves up to come to their defense. Every day we pray in our Amidah that God will restore justice that was once brought by judges and advisors, that God will remove any sorrow or suffering from among us. V'haser mimenu yagon v'anacha. And may God bless us with kindness and compassion. May God's rachamim, rachmanis, and chesed be mirrored here on earth by the righteousness and the seeking of justice that is ours for the claiming, ours for the taking. Baruch atah Adonai, melech ohev tzedakah u'mishpat. God is watching. Praised are you, Adonai, sovereign of the universe, who loves righteousness and justice. Amen.